Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pipeline, the show where I interview innovative and creative people and learn more about their past, current, and future projects. On this episode, my guest is artist Steve Grimmer. Steve is a ceramicist and the owner of Alto Clayworks Studio in Alto Pass, Illinois. Welcome to Pipeline, Steve.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. I've been enjoying watching some of the interviews that you've had on them. Looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you. Well, my first question is, how are you and your family doing?
We're actually pretty good. My wife is a elementary teacher, and so it's more or less stable for her, except that she's now teaching from home and using electronics and sending packets, which is really hard. She also, a new challenge for her right now is that she's teaching an English immersion first and second grade multi-age classroom. And so because we're near a university, she's got students from China, from Ghana, Saudi Arabia, Honduras, all over the place, plus about half kids from the United States who are not English language learners. And so that's been a real challenge for her. And then all of a sudden to throw in, okay, now do this distance. So she's become the Zoom queen. And
wow.
Yeah. But otherwise, we're good. We've got, I live in Alto Pass, like you said. We're a village of 400 people in the Shawnee National Forest. And so when I'm getting a little stir crazy, I can just walk through the village and into the forest and down a nature trail, which is really nice.
Nice. Now, are you, during this time, are you still open for instruction at your studio? Or?
Nothing. We shut down March 15 when the governor of Illinois kind of gave everybody shelter-in-place orders. Mm-hmm. And actually, things had really kind of settled down before that, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before that. This, March is really the time when things start picking up after winter, when there's a couple wineries in the village, mm-hmm. and the Shawnee Hills Wine Trail goes through here. So usually about this time of year, the wineries start picking up again as the weather gets nice. And I noticed this year that nothing was happening. And I think that people were seeing the news and getting a little worried and staying home already.
Wow.
So I've been shut down, and which is bad for income, and it's pretty quiet around here, but I got a lot of work done in the studio.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So, yeah.
Hope we're going to talk about that here.
Yeah.
Great. So as you know, the format of Pipeline is looking at past, current, and future work that you're going to be doing, projects, creative endeavors that you're into. So my first question is, what's a project you worked on in the past 5 or 10 years that is particularly meaningful to you, or that was a particular challenge for you?
Well, Alto Clayworks is the big project. We were living in Canada, in Winnipeg, Manitoba for 9 years. I was a professor at the University of Manitoba in ceramic art, and a long way from home. And our parents are getting older. My parents and my wife's parents both live in Southern Illinois in Carbondale. Excuse me. And they're not young anymore. And we wanted to get closer to them, and so that our kids would be around their grandparents. Well, their grandparents are still lots of fun. And we had an opportunity to buy an old elementary school built in 1928 in the village of Alto Pass. And it's a grand old brick building. And we looked at it, it just really kind of screamed ceramic art center. Mm-hmm. It's got little tiny classrooms and library downstairs, and a couple of big classrooms that used to be the music room, and one used to be the kindergarten. And then upstairs, about 30 years ago, the previous owners, the Austins, bought it from the village and totally renovated the upstairs for living space. And since he was a antique furniture refinisher, among other things, he had gobs and gobs of wood trim and things like that. So upstairs looks like a Victorian home. And then the downstairs still looks like an old schoolhouse, a big brick schoolhouse. So we've got studios, we've got rental studios, we've got a classroom, we've got a showroom, and then I've got an outbuilding for my studio, and then a big barn where my big wood burning kiln is.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have actually been in your house there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, back when it was the Austin's antique store. I don't think I was in the living quarters, but I was in we frequented the showrooms with the different antiques.
Yeah, yeah, they had a nice antique store. And so when, yeah, they moved out and they built a place in Carbondale that's got just one floor instead of stairs, and it doesn't have nearly 4 acres of mowing. And they're in their 70s, you know, I can't blame them for that.
Yeah.
But
So
for us, it's, go ahead.
I was going to ask, when did you move in?
We moved in 2014 in October. We moved back down here from Canada in July, and then we stayed at Christy's parents' house for the summer. And then we moved, you know, we were able to close on this place and move in. And I've had, you know, several people rent studio space from me, and I've had an apprentice from Southeast Missouri State University. He got a degree in ceramics, and then he's just now finishing up about 3.5 years with me.
And how long did it take, you know, once you closed, how long did it take to get to a working studio?
The pottery making part was, you know, just about a week to actually, you know, put down the wheel and get the clay in there and start making pots. It took a while to find some bricks. I was kind of trolling Craigslist in the area looking for fire brick and different kinds of used online marketplaces. And I saw an ad for used fire brick at a brick factory in central Missouri that had closed down in the 90s when I was an undergraduate student. And I remember getting their clay. It's called the Chicago Wellsville Fire Brick Company. And when I was an undergraduate at Kansas City Art Institute, that's one of the clays that we used. And that place closed down in 95 or 96. And this guy who's kind of a mad scientist, an inventor, bought it. And he was doing interesting things with the kilns there. He invented a process where he would take basically ag waste, straw from wheat fields, and heat it up to the black char point in the brick kiln, and inject nitrogen gas in it to cool it quickly. And the black char ash would fix nitrogen. And then they take the stuff and spread it on fields, and it would put nitrogen in the fields. So he's taking ag waste, and he's got one of those, you know, like one of those oxygen generators that people use when they're on oxygen from emphysema and stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, he just takes the nitrogen waste stream off that and collects that. And he's got a hose that runs way out in the field somewhere where the oxygen goes. It's like, I don't want anything to do with oxygen at my kilns. And so he runs these big hay bales through it and makes nitrogen fixed ash. And the University of Missouri Ag Extension Office has been over there and looked at his stuff, and he's getting really great results from it.
Wow.
So when anyway, the upside of that is when they closed the brick factory, they shipped out all their orders for brick. And then all of their other stock, they piled up and back. And there must have been about 500,000 to 1 million brick in a pile. So this pile of bricks the size of one of the factory buildings. And he was selling it for 50 cents a brick if it's laying on the ground. And if it's on a pallet, 60 cents a brick. And that's about 10 cents on a dollar for these fire brick. And so I went up there and met with him and started palletizing bricks. He had done a fundraiser for the local Boy Scout troop, whereas for every brick that they picked up and stacked neatly on a pallet, he would pay them 10 cents.
Oh, nice.
So they made a bunch of money, and that's why the price difference on the brick. And so I got 14,000 some brick trucked over here, which I would not have been able to afford otherwise.
Wow.
And built a big kiln. And so I got that finished in 2015. So we picked out the bricks in May, and then by June I had the bricks and was building, and we lit the kiln in October.
Now, for each fire, do you have to rebuild the kiln, or did?
No, the kiln stays the way it is. And we fill the kiln with pottery on silicon carbide shelves and with bricks between the shelves, and it holds about 400 pots depending on how big they are. Wow. And then we brick up the front door and the side door where we were able to walk into the kiln and build a firebox, and then light the kiln. We lit the kiln yesterday morning, and we're going up about 75 degrees an hour to 2,350 degrees, and we'll hold that for about a day. And then the second chamber takes the waste heat from the first chamber, and then that'll be about 2,100 degrees after the hold, the soak time on the first chamber. And then It'll be about another 6 to 8 hours of putting wood in that chamber to bring that one up to 2350. And then 5 days to cool down and about 3 hours to unload.
Wow.
Yeah,
Now,
so it's a meditation on fire, basically.
now, do you, forgive my ignorance, but do you have, is there special masonry for the kiln?
Yeah, these are Super Duty fire bricks, so that they're rated up to about 2600 to 2800 degrees. So there's a lot of alumina in them. Like a common house brick will melt at about 2000 to 2100 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to use those. Basically, we're firing stoneware and porcelain, which matures and becomes watertight at about 2300. And the other thing that we burn wood for is because the wood ash, as we go through 4 cords of wood in 4 days in this kiln of oak and hickory. And the wood ash, as it collects on the pottery, will start to melt at about 2100 degrees and form a natural glaze. And at 2350, it becomes a little bit fluid and glossy. And so depending on where the piece is in relationship to the firebox and what kind of clay and what kind of wood you're using and the firing conditions, you get different kinds of colors and effects on the pottery. And it's actually a fairly durable, food safe surface.
And with the brick again, is there a specialized masonry that holds it?
We used just, it's a standard fire brick is 9 by 4.5 by 3 inches. They weigh about 9 pounds. And we use fire clay, which is the clay that they're made out of, which is like a coarse, really heat resistant clay, and sand. And
okay, so that's your mortar, basically?
that's the mortar, and it's mixed like the peanut butter from the co-op that you mix together, and it's kind of fluid. That's the consistency, and you
does the
trowel on the brick, and it's like an 1/8 of an inch thick.
Okay, and does the intensity of the heat, does it make it more of a bond?
Yeah, it's a heat setting mortar, so it's not, there's no Portland cement in it. Like, when you're laying up a house, you use maybe a 1/4 inch or more of Portland cement mortar. Portland cement, it will melt in a kiln at the temperatures I fire. And so we want a super thin layer of mortar between the bricks. And the whole thing can kind of shift and move because of the expansion and contraction is so great.
Yeah.
But you want things to be able to slide just a little bit.
Now, did you do this, or do you hire cement masons to put
No,
it?
I built it. I've got a friend. I got a friend who lives in the village who's a sculptor and a potter and a glass blower and a filmmaker. Yeah, he's a really cool guy. And he has a bobcat with forks on it, and so he drove it down from up the hill on the ridge where he lives, and he brought all the bricks down from the truck down the hill to the barn down below, and we built a wooden form for the kiln and started stacking bricks.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to make it?
We started laying bricks, I guess, in June, and then we were done by mid-October, early October. And we fired the kiln, and we had a big pottery sale Thanksgiving weekend.
Great.
So we'd had like all your pots in one kiln, so to speak, but it worked.
Now, in what you've been describing, it sounds like a lot of chemical and physical reactions. And
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, do you have a degree in math?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you in another degree in fine arts?
Yeah. Bachelor of Fine Art from Kansas City Art Institute and a Master of Fine Art from the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth.
Okay. And what was the math degree?
That was the University of Iowa. That's a degree in numerical analysis.
Okay.
Yeah. Kind of made my head explode.
Now, has that math degree carried over, transferred in the skills you have to know?
Yeah. Just like being good with three-dimensional space, but artists are taught that kind of stuff too. Like, how do you take these square things and make a curve? Because my kiln's got, the first chamber of the kiln has got is curved. It's a tunnel it kind of starts low and goes high and ends, along the flame path, and then kind of gets wide in the middle and gets narrow at the end. But like the shape of the curve is a catenary, which is the shape that you get when you hang a chain between 2 points. The St. Louis arch is very close to a catenary.
Okay.
And it's a self-supporting arch if you make it out of bricks.
Hmm.
And so it's a catenary in a couple different directions. I think just, the kind of analytical thinking that you learn in mathematics is helpful. I also took a lot of chemistry.
I was
And
going to ask about that
yeah,
because,
glaze chemistry, it's really helpful if you want to study glaze chemistry to have a background in chemistry.
hmm, yeah, more, you have to be a Renaissance man to be.
You do, yeah. Yeah, you have to know a lot of stuff. It's one of the things actually when I was a pottery, and actually when I was a math student at the University of Iowa, you have to take a certain number of fine arts or humanities courses when you're a science major. And so one of the kids in the dorm said, oh, take pottery, it's a blow off easy A. And it was neither of the above. But you get to play with fire, you get to play with mud, you get to lay pipe, you get to do chemistry, you get to do functional stuff and go to potlucks. And they partied every bit as hard as the mathematicians. So I felt right at home.
Now, was that your introduction? Is that what led you to go into ceramics and pottery?
Yeah, I knew after about a semester that I was probably going to do this for quite a while.
Really?
Yeah. So I finished my math degree and then took a year and a half about of ceramics at SIU. And then Harris Teller, the professor here, said, well, if you're going to be serious, you should go off to Kansas City.
I remember visiting you in
Iowa City.
What's that?
You guys came up to Iowa City because you guys had a gig at a bar there.
Oh, I don't remember that. It must have been good. But at where it on SIU campus, where was your studio?
Pulliam Home, the industrial.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Visited you there too.
Yeah. Yeah. I built a little kiln there when I almost didn't know what I was doing. And I was given permission to try.
So regarding current projects, would this be considered your current project, or do you have something else going on too?
Yeah, I guess the current project is firing, and it's kind of an ongoing thing. And we have a potter's trail that we started in the area. There's actually 7 potters that live around, Carbondale, Murfreesboro, Alto Pass area.
Now, is there, is it because the Southern Illinois culture is ripe for that, or there's other things? I was going to ask, where do you get your clay? Is it from Southern Illinois, or do you get it?
There's a clay pit down the road, just south of here, in a little town. It used to be called Kaolin, which is the kind of clay that's there. And the Kirkpatrick Brothers Pottery in Anna, they got their clay out of there. And they're kind of a collectible, famous pottery from the 1800s down there. And it's a recreation area now. Basically, it's a little fishing hole and a swimming hole down a gravel road. But if you go in the summertime when the water, you can wade in and pull white clay right out of the pond there. And it's nice stuff.
Wow.
Some of that. It's a lot of work because there's grit and stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really fine, nice white clay. Usually what I do is I mix it with a couple other materials, and then I dip my pots. I mix it to like a paint consistency called a slip, and I dip sometimes my pots in there, and it's very sensitive to the fire of the kiln.
Wow.
But most of my clay comes from a supplier in St. Louis, and it's actually mixed in Ohio. It's blended.
Okay. And kind of going back to what I was thinking about too is, why is there this concentration of potters and artists where you are?
That's a good question. A few of them went through the program at SIU, and SIU traditionally has had a very good School of Art and a good ceramics program. And so some of the students who graduated there and taught there, have maintained studios in the area. And then potters seem to like to find places with wood, if they're going to make a wood kiln, and with woods, because you can usually find a cheap place to live off in the woods rather than in a big city. And we've got Southern Illinois, and especially this part of Southern Illinois, is really turning into more of a tourist area. And so there's wineries and there's cabins and there's recreation. And I think potters are finding places where they can live and maybe hang out a shingle and start selling pottery. And it's, you know, it's a place that's amenable to that, especially if you've got, you know, my wood burning kiln, it produces a fair amount of smoke when we fire. And, you know, being in a village and I don't have close neighbors, people kind of just let each other do what they want to do. Try to stay out of each other's hair. In a big city, you wouldn't be able to do that so easily.
That's true. That's true. And with such a big kiln, is this just your work, or do you let others fire their stuff too?
Usually it's me and then my friend Dan, who lives here in the village, and my two assistants, and who have, you know, rent studio from me. And then there's a fellow in Carbondale who got a degree in ceramics in 1972 from the University of Illinois, but worked as a ceramic engineer out in Boston for many years, and they've retired back here. So there's a crew of about 5 typically. One of my assistants got a job and just moved up to Chicago recently, so he's out of the picture. And so this time it's just me and Dan with each about 200 pots in there, and then my assistant Liston, and then my friend Pat. So there's 4 of us, and we do 6-hour shifts around the clock.
And that started this morning, I think.
That started this morning. So Dan's down there now. I'll be back on at midnight, and then I'll be back on at 6. So about every 12 hours, I'm back on.
And how long did it take you to load all those pieces?
We started on last weekend. We started on Saturday morning, and we finished Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
So, you know, a good portion of it standing there looking at all these pots, thinking, how in the world are we going to get all these dang things in that little brick box? And then, you know, sort of talking about strategy and where, you know, the different parts of the kiln give different results. You know, if you're real close to the firebox, you get a lot of ash and embers and stuff on the pots. And so you don't want your delicate things there. You know, your dinner plates, you don't want those kind of inundated with ash and stuff, and teapots. But vases and big covered jars and sculptural things look really great there. So we kind of figure out, you know, the second chamber hardly gets any ash on it at all. So things with lots of glaze will go back there, get real colorful results back there. And then we just start going, and it takes about, the first day is probably just over 2/3 of the load. And the second day is the final third of the load, plus brick up the doors and make sure the firebox grates and everything are in good shape, and kind of clear the decks.
And what are the shelves made of that hold those?
They're silicon carbide. And so it's you know, if you ever used a grinding wheel on a bench grinder, it's the same material as that, or even like a whetstone. They're 12 by 24 inches by almost 3/4 of an inch thick. And they're supported by bricks. So you put a shelf on the floor, and then you put 3 bricks on the shelf to make a tripod. You know, 1 on each corner and one in the middle on the other side. And then you put all your pots around there, and then you put another shelf, and then more bricks, more pots, more shelves, and the kiln holds, I think there's 60 some shelves in there.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's, you know, everything's got to be kind of the same height that's on the same shelf, fit under the bricks to make it an efficient pack. And the stacks of shelves are anywhere between, in the back chamber, they're about 5-foot high stacks, and there's 3 shelves on the floor. And in the first chamber, there's 2 sets of stacks of 3 shelves. And the back one is about 4 feet, and the front one's about 5 feet high.
And you have photos of these on your Facebook and your altoclayworks.com.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, altoclayworks.com, and you know, I'm taking pictures. There's pictures of the load that we did last weekend on my Facebook page, and usually around the time right after the firing, I put a bunch more pictures on altoclayworks.com. But you can see pictures of the building of the kiln and the firing of the kiln and stuff like that on there. And each firing, typically, I put a portfolio of nice work. I think I'm 2 firings behind, actually.
I would recommend our viewers and listeners to check that out as they're listening to this, because I saw the pictures, and it's just, to me, it's mind-blowing. You know, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. So it's very cool. And I have to ask you this too, because I'm a wood smoker.
Yes.
What do you use?
I'm a pot smoker and a pot dealer.
Are there specific woods that you have to use?
There's a whole bunch of different woods that you can use. We're really fortunate that the year that I moved here, I met this guy, Lonnie Hickam. I saw a truck at the general store that said Hickam Forestry or Hickam and Sons Logging, and so I found him. And he and his older son have a logging company, and they bid on stands of trees and they'll log them for people. And his younger son and his wife run a small sawmill. And so they make railroad ties and pallet wood and stuff like that. And they sell me the slab wood, which is the bark and probably an inch or two of wood when they square up the logs to mill. Otherwise it's a waste product. And so I can take I've got a big trailer on the back of my truck, and he's got a big loader, and he'll put 2 bundles on there for about $25. And so it's mostly oak hickory when he's doing railroad ties and stuff like that. When he's doing pallets, there's a lot of poplar mixed in. But poplar doesn't have a whole lot of heat. Oak and hickory are great. When I taught in Canada, we got primarily tamarack, which is known down here as larch. And wow. It's a relative of the bald cypress.
Okay, yeah.
And, it's a real hot wood. It kind of pops and sputters a lot, but it's a real good wood to fire with. I know people out west fire with pine a lot. I've got a friend in Alaska who fires with birch. But any fairly hard wood works really well. If it's a softer wood, if it's resinous, it works well, like a birch or a pine.
Mm-hmm.
About a year ago, we got a load of all hickory to fire with. And I almost felt bad, like saying, this is a lot of really good barbecue wood. And it smelled amazing in there for 4 days. The embering qualities of hickory, that make it so great for barbecue, besides the flavor, we did a lot of raking out of the firebox. The ember would just keep filling up, so we had a rake that we'd pull the wood out and pile up, pull the embers out, pile over by the barn.
Uh-huh.
So it's nice to have some soft wood like poplar or something in there, so you can, every once in a while put a lighter, softer wood in there among the embers.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps it burn down a little faster. And yeah, different woods have different blaze effects. Pine gives if you melt pine ash, it's got a lot of silica in it, and so if it melts on the pottery, you tend to get a fairly transparent, greenish, glassy surface.
Mm-hmm.
Oak tends to be kind of a harder yellow looking ash. Hickory kind of is in that family. Tamarack or larch is kind of a hard yellow, almost a paint, like a cloddy paint.
Wow.
Or you get some really nice white and cream colors out of it, which can be really nice.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of variation. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you, during a fire, do you have to, I don't know, do you have to let the local fire department know?
Yeah. Well, when I first built the kiln, I'd done a couple, helped out with a couple fundraisers in the village to build a new bathroom in the park downtown. And we did some pancake breakfasts, things like that. And so I was in the kitchen with the fire chief, the volunteer fire department chief. We got to know each other a bit. I told him what I was doing, and then he came down and looked at it after it was finished. He goes, "Yeah, it looks good to me." And then, so I would call him before I fired, just so that if people called and said, "Hey, there's a big plume of smoke," then he would. And then after maybe the third firing, I called him. He goes, "Yeah, I know." So I don't call him anymore. I think there's only 400 people in the village, and I don't know everybody, but everybody knows me.
Right.
I'm the potter, and so
yeah,
people know.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alto Pass is a great little village.
It is. Yeah, we got 2 wineries. One of them's got a really bang up restaurant in it. We've got a bank, a full service bank, a post office, a general store with a decent selection of beer and cold cuts, and he makes good sandwiches.
Is that Mike?
5 churches. What's that?
Is the general store, is that Mike? I can't remember his last name now.
Mike Jeremiah?
No.
Mike Blank.
Yeah, Mike Blank.
Mike Blank owned the Root Beer Saloon.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's sort of retired. The place is still there, but they've not been open for quite a while. The general store was owned by Jackie Grammer for many years, but now it's owned by Darren Duty.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's a character. He's great fun. He knows everybody. If you want to know what's going on in the village, you go talk to Darren.
Now, another thing I wanted to ask you about was, where you get your ideas for designs. I notice over your shoulder, I see some things. I don't know if they're yours or not. I'm assuming they are, but who were some artists that influenced you?
When I was an undergraduate, I looked a lot at Japanese, like medieval Japanese folk pottery, and tea ceremony pottery, like Bizen and Shigaraki and Iga. Primarily, I think because the people who I first studied with either studied in Japan or looked at a lot of that stuff. And so they would show you a lot of stuff. At Kansas City Art Institute, there was a really nice little museum called the Nelson Gallery right across the street from the school. And they have a really great Chinese and Japanese and English ceramics collection. And so if you were stuck or having a hard time, the teacher would often say, why don't you go over to the Nelson Museum, and on the second floor in the northeast room, on the shelf over to the left there, you'll see this one pot. And I want you to look at that. And I want you to look at the lid. And I want you to remember that. And I want you to come back and I want you to make that lid for that pot.
Wow.
Okay. So I ended up looking at a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started looking more at Middle Eastern pottery and Islamic pottery and architecture. I think because of my mathematical influence and the tile and the geometry of the architecture of the Islamic world, and especially the medieval Islamic world, really fascinated me. So I looked at a lot of that. I went to China for a while, a few years ago, to set up a program at a university there, and that kind of rekindled my love for Chinese pots, especially Song Dynasty and Dong Dynasty pottery. I drink a lot of Chinese tea, and I was kind of doing that before, but then came back from China with a real lovely tea habit. So I drink out of these little Yixing teapots.
Now, is that one that you made, or is that?
No, this one I brought back from China. And so the pots you see behind me are mostly Chinese teapots.
Okay.
And but I've been I think I've been lately getting more into German and English 15th and 16th century pots. And pots that were made in very high numbers, wherein the potter left a lot of marks on the pot, where the throwing marks and the marks from the fingers where he picked it up off the wheel, and where it was trimmed, and the way the handle was put on very directly. And they show a lot about the process and the plasticity of the clay. And I'm really very interested in pots that are going to be used a lot in the home. And so I try to make them very functional. I try to make them very approachable, and try to make them seem as much like a person made it and something happened during the making process as possible, rather than trying to, like Chinese pottery, especially Song Dynasty and forward. A lot of the marks were trying to, take away all the marks of the making. To,
so kind of transcended the human touch of it.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of the pots, the very, very famous pots from China from that period were palace wares. And so, like, the studios or the village factories and the kilns oftentimes were making pots for the palace or for a local, a merchant or a wealthy or powerful person. And so and then they were buried in a tomb with that person. So we see the very, very highest end stuff. A lot of the stuff that was made for daily use got, broken and used up. And so a lot of that is shards.
So, and that's what drew you to the German and English pottery?
Yeah, I think the Burnap collection of English slipware at the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City had quite an impact on me. And then the pots I was making, I've got my own showroom, and so I sell my pots at retail directly to the people who buy them, and people come in and talk to me about how they use their pots and what kinds of things they want. And they talk about, oh, I've got this pot and you call it, you call it a tumbler, but I put flowers in it. And if it were a little bigger, I could put more flowers in it. And then, but the husband would say, yeah, but if it were also a little bigger, I could put more beer in it. And so, change size for that. And then, oftentimes, like, a couple will come in and the wife will buy, a certain kind of pot, and the husband will buy another kind of pot. And just talking to them about the way they're using the pots kind of influences the way that I make them.
Wow, now you're in my area of user experience research.
Yeah, it's living. It's a living endeavor right here.
Wow, that's
so people just ask for certain kinds of pots, and if I hear it often enough, I guess I get it through my thick head that, oh, I should make I should make a dozen of those, or I should make 2 dozen of those. And then people kind of respond, and then I change it a little bit, and I feed off of their response to my pottery.
So you're making this. There's a functional aspect to what you're doing. Do you ever think, well, I've got a vision for a piece that's I know is not functional, but I just want to do it? Do you ever go that way?
I did a lot more of that when I was a professor, and I was showing stuff in galleries, and it didn't matter so much if you sold a lot of them. You had to sell some. But I wasn't quite as, I think when I was a professor, I was more interested in the extrinsic properties of the pottery and the stuff that they referenced rather than the object itself so much. I mean, the object itself was still very important because it's a functional pot, but I was more interested in referencing, medieval Islamic architecture, for example. And so I would make thicker tile-like pieces, maybe or a stand for a piece that weighed, several pounds. And so I did some of that for a while. I've not done a lot of that recently. Mostly right now, it's really about function. And the content of the work is function and the way that they integrate themselves within the domestic setting. And so it's very important for me that the pots go into someone's home and they don't get put on a shelf to collect dust. And Ken Ferguson, my undergraduate professor, my main undergraduate professor, used to say that he wanted his pottery to be used up. And the most important thing was that you would use it until it broke. And then if you want to glue it back together and put it on a shelf so it can collect dust, well, then you get both experiences. If you put it on the shelf, you don't truly experience the pot. You just kind of dust it every now and then. And so it's really important for me that they're able to take a lot of abuse and are useful for a lot of different things. Teapots they're a one-trick pony, but it's such an important trick that you make those. But I make a lot of plates, bowls, tumblers, tankards. Now that's a new thing now. Kind of a bellied. You used to make a beer stein, more of a more modern German beer stein. They're getting a big belly, kind of like more of a medieval beer stein, and people are really responding to that.
Wow. So have you seen a common theme, a most common theme from people who are buying your work? What are they into?
The number one seller by volume is a coffee cup.
Okay.
And the number one seller by dollar sales is a medium-sized serving bowl that's about 9 to 10 inches across.
Okay.
And they're actually pretty close in price, but there's enough of the bowls. And I can make a lot of both those pretty quickly. So I do. Those are my 2 bread and butter pots. Teapots take a long time, but they sell out, and the price is going up because of that. And then eventually the price has to go up. People keep buying it. Big serving bowls that are 9 to 10 inches across and 9 to 10 inches high. They take an awful lot of room in the kiln. And like in the place where I can put a big giant serving bowl, I can put 10 coffee cups, but I can't quite charge 10 times the price for a big giant bowl.
Right.
So I make them anyway because I love them, and everybody eventually wants a big giant serving bowl.
Nice.
Yeah, covered jars are great. A couple times a year, somebody will come in and ask for a funerary urn. Like
really?
Yep, a loved one has passed, and they want something to put the ashes in.
Wow.
And yeah, that's kind of an honor.
Thought of that. I thought that was more of a metals type.
Yeah, people in metals do that, but yeah, they're coming to me.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I know that it's a cubic inch of ash per pound of body weight typically.
Okay. I'll
So if
have
you know how if you know how big the deceased was, then you can fill a pot with water and you can figure out the volume, and you say,
Yeah.
yep, this will do it.
There's your math degree coming in handy.
There's the math degree right there. Yeah. Yeah, I even had to put ash into one for a client. She thought she was going to be able to just pick up the jar, and she was not able to. And so she brought the ash. And I went into another room. She was quite distraught. And my dog Lucy sat with her in the
Oh,
showroom. I've got some nice comfy chairs, and Lucy sat with her. It was just it brought tears to my eyes.
wow.
And she pet Lucy, and Lucy was very quiet next to her. I transferred the remains of her husband into a jar.
Oh my
He was
God.
going to Arlington Cemetery to be interred there.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I epoxied the lid on because it had to be sealed permanently.
Wow.
That was pretty heavy. And an honor.
Did they didn't teach you that in art school, I
They
guess.
don't teach you anything about that in art school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. So my final question is, what's coming down the pipeline for Steve and Alto Clay Works?
Teaware, I think. I went to China and I learned a lot about Chinese tea, and I've got a big Chinese tea collection and teapot collection, and they're exquisite and they're tiny. But I want to start learning to make those. And a wild thing about Instagram that's I have actually a number of followers on Instagram on my pottery feed who are producers of tea in China. And so it's the strangest thing is like I can have a conversation with somebody in China about the spring harvest of tea. And there's a couple other people who make teaware in China that follow me, and I follow them on Instagram, and we kind of chat every now and then. And one or two of them has asked if I ever make Chinese teaware. And so there's a guy in Taiwan who is interested in seeing if I can make some things for him to sell in his shop.
Oh, wow.
So I've got to teach myself to make Chinese teaware, Chinese style teaware, but it's not going to be like that. It's going to be like what an American guy would make in the Midwest when he drinks a lot of Chinese tea and would ship something out to China or to. That's going to be a big challenge. There's like trays that you put your teaware on that have the perforated tops of the water. You spill a lot of water sometimes when you make Chinese tea in the Gong Fu style tea ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's got a collecting area underneath for the water and a little drain, and a little pitcher for pouring tea out of, and a little dish for presenting the tea leaves before they're brewed, and a dish for presenting the tea leaves after they're brewed.
Wow.
It's tiny little teacups, and so I'm going to try to start making some of that this summer.
Now, is that the whole process for the Chinese tea presentation? Is it very different from the Japanese?
Yeah, the Japanese tea ceremony tends to be much more ceremonial in terms of presentation, where one person makes tea in the chawan and whips it with the little whisk and presents it, and both people are on the knees. The Chinese tea ceremony tends to be a little more convivial, where a number of people are sitting around a table having tea, but just it's an excuse to have some really nice teaware.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gong Fu tea preparation method, typically they use a very small teapot, around half a cup in volume.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically you put 8 to 10 grams of tea into that. So fill it 2/3 of the way full, and then pour hot water into it. And then the infusion time might be 20 to 30 seconds. And then the tea comes out and goes into tiny little cups. And you drink maybe, 10 mil or something like that, 20 mil. And then by the time you're done drinking that, there's more tea being poured into your cup. And so you might get 8 or 10 infusions out of the tea, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute 10, minute 30, minute 50. And so, you taste the same tea over and over and over again, and taste it, as it develops flavor as it's being brewed. But oftentimes, it's an excuse for, a bunch of people to sit around and enjoy tea together.
Mm-hmm. Now, for those that let me try to think what I'm trying to say here. What are they actually boiling the water in? What kind of vessel?
Usually it's like a metal, just like a
Oh, okay. Yeah.
tea kettle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the teapot. This is a kind of a big Chinese teapot.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a smaller. This is, a smaller one.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. That's actually a blue clay.
That's nice.
China. Yeah, it's a lovely little pot. And so I've got a different pot for each kind of tea that I brew. These Yixing style pots, the clay is a little bit porous. There's no glaze on it, and so the clay over time will absorb oils from the tea that you're brewing, and will actually take on the flavor of the tea. And so the idea is that you don't want to have one teapot interfering with the flavor of the tea, because don't brew darker teas in a teapot and then try to brew a green tea in there, because you'll taste the darker tea.
Mm-hmm.
But after many years, they get a patina, and you can actually take a dry teapot that's well seasoned and smell it, and you'll know what kind of tea is being brewed in it.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you wash it?
I just rinse it with hot water and dry it out.
No soap?
No.
Okay.
No, you would taste that for sure.
Right. We got some new cast iron skillets, and we've been
Exactly.
handling them very specific.
Same principle.
Yeah.
Same principle.
Right.
Yeah. Don't
right.
ruin the seasoning.
Yeah. And where do you do most of your research for, I don't know if you remembered this from art school days, or, if this person in Taiwan contacted you and then you had to do all your research on that. Where do you get your background info on this?
Well, actually, my dad is a math PhD and a professor, and he had a Chinese PhD student, probably in the early 80s, who, after he got his PhD with my dad, gave my dad one of these little Yixing pots as a gift. And then I was really fascinated with it, but I had not started making pottery yet. And he gave it to me just because I was so fascinated by it. And that started my fascination with Yixing pottery. And then, you see it in museums. And when I went to China about 5 years ago to set up the exchange program with the university there, the professor there that I went to visit was a tea aficionado. And every afternoon at 2 o'clock, we would go into his office and drink tea for an hour or two before going out to dinner. Nice. You can do so much research online now. Mm-hmm. And if you want to see a picture of a certain kind of pottery, and you just look it up. But I've got a fairly good sized collection. I've got books, and anytime I travel, I make an effort to go look at stuff.
Mm-hmm. And do you still have that tea set from your dad?
I do. Here. This is the teapot right there.
Oh, wow.
It's the shape of a stump of a tree.
Oh, my God.
It's got a bamboo spout and a little bamboo handle. And there's a little...
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. That's the lid. It's an exquisite little pot. It's a weird shape for making tea in, because the lid is so big that if you tip it very much to pour it all, water comes out of the lid. So it's more of a decorative pot than a functional pot.
Do you know the background of it? Do you know anything about...
What's that?
Do you know anything about the background of that particular pot?
No. It's probably made in Yixing, the village in China where this clay is from. Mm-hmm. Probably it was made for giftware. And so it's not really made for tea making. It's made for gifting or for display. Okay. But other than that, there's a stamp on the bottom, with Chinese characters, and I've not had anybody try to read it for me, but it probably says the name of the shop or the name of the factory that made it. But other than that, I don't know anything about it. Interesting. Yeah. And how old is it? It's early 1980s. Okay. So yeah, it's early for getting things out of China. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, China had not really opened up like it has now. It was not a major exporter to the West at that time. And do you have a timeline for
your first fire for the Chinese tea sets?
Probably in the fall. We fire 3 times a year in the kiln. We fire October, and that is in preparation for the big open house Thanksgiving weekend. And then we fire in January, and typically we fire in April because we have a big open house the weekend before Mother's Day in May. But this year we were kind of clamped down with shelter-in-place orders, so that's what we're firing right now. It's excited. Well, things are settling down now. We can fire. So probably I'll fire in November.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hope to be able to get back up to Southern Illinois and come visit your studio.
Yeah.
When this blows over. So, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Pipeline. This has been just fascinating for me. There was so much I learned from you on this. And I hope I'd like to visit with you again after you do the Chinese tea set. I'd love to hear about that.
That sounds really great. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's nice talking to somebody who's thinking about a lot of different things and thinking about creativity and the way that you kind of feed your creative impulses. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's great catching up with an old friend too.
You too. Well, tell Christy hi, and
I will.
You stay safe, my friend.
Likewise. Take care of yourself down there.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.